Welcome back to the program. My name is Giovanni. Did you know that there are 2.2 million kids being homeschooled today? And a lot of those kids are Christian. If you have ever wondered what homeschooling is like, we have invited Merissa Scheumann to talk to us about homeschooling. In this conversation, one of the things Merissa wants you to know is that homeschooling is doable. From resources to Christian curriculums to accredited organizations, there is a lot out there for you if you want to homeschool. So let's find out. Merissa, thank you so much for coming on the program. I'm really excited to talk to you today because not having had any experience myself with homeschooling, I'm interested to hear about what your experience has been. But before we kind of delve into that, tell us a little bit. You just mentioned to me that you were in education, or you were an educator for a little bit. Tell us about that experience that you've already had as a teacher.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. And with my background, I knew from the time I was quite young that I would love to be a teacher. I had caught the glimpse of how nice it is to have that aha moment happen in front of you with a student, just with working with my younger sister or friends, like when we catch a concept and there's that light bulb, it's so exciting and so rewarding. So I knew that I'd like to do that. Continued to love it through my college training. I went to school for 5th through 12th grade English language arts education. And then I was able to teach for 2 years in Minneapolis public schools, 6th grade and 8th grade English. Had a really good experience there. Yeah, I love middle schoolers. They are like the perfect age of everything is big and exciting, and school is still fun. And it's a beautiful age.
I do see that at BTA where I work. With all the middle schoolers, and they, all the like the 6th graders especially, they are the cutest.
They're so sweet, and they think they're so grown up. And I remember being that age and thinking I was so grown up. Yeah, they're so great. I love the middle school age. But I think by the time that my husband and I were talking about education and getting married, by that time I already knew that we would probably like to homeschool our own kids, partially because I wanted to have, maybe selfishly, those aha moments to myself, be able to walk through it with my own kids, but also just seeing, I had been homeschooled for a few years myself, right around middle school when I wanted to be involved in extracurriculars that my town didn't offer. So I did a few years of online homeschooling and was able to see the benefit for myself, being able to slow down in some subjects and speed up in others and look into what I was interested in. And my husband was homeschooled all the way through. And so,
so you come from a homeschooling family.
We have a lot of rich resources coming behind us, which is great. And so we had seen the beauty of how it can work and how it can be great for individualizing what a different student might need from a sibling or someone else's experience. And so that was part of what motivated us to want to do homeschooling. I don't feel like my background in education has given me a leg up at all yet because my oldest is 9. So I don't know anything about anybody yet less than 10 years old officially, with my training.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this. You were talking about you were taught in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and you had your kids here, so your experience with homeschooling has been here in Massachusetts, is that right?
For the most part, yeah. We didn't really officially start homeschooling until my daughter was old enough here. So we were always doing home school, but you're always learning. I like to tell parents if they're thinking about entering homeschooling when they have little ones, they've already been a teacher at home because they're learning so much in those first few years of life. But as far as reporting to a district or something, that's all been here for us.
Yeah, and so that's I'm glad you talked about that, or reporting to a district, because that's one of the questions that I wanted to ask you. For parents who are watching and may be interested in homeschooling, whatever age they're interested in homeschooling their child. What are those steps that they might need, to do before actually being able to do it at home?
Right. So every district is a little bit different, but most of them are quite standard. There's often just something on their website that you can find the home education liaison and contact that person. Usually there's a form to fill out, and it really does not need to be much. Sometimes some districts I've heard of will ask for a lot of information, like how many hours will you spend on each subtopic per year? And That is more than what by law they can ask, according to, it's called the Homeschool Legal Defense Attorneys, I think, or Association. And that has a lot of really good information. So if you just start with hslda.com and look for Massachusetts, you can find out what the requirements are. And then I think there's a page that walks you through how to find your district and go from there.
Okay. So because you were homeschooled, you know, that's really why you wanted to do it. So how has it been being on the sort of the teaching side, right? And what are some of the things that have been perhaps a challenge? But as you say, you know, there's also joy that's part of it, right?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the biggest challenges is also one of the greatest joys is that there are emotionally difficult moments. So we have 5 kids, ages just about 2 to just about 10. And so siblings do not always get along. And teacher and parent, or teacher, parent, and child do not always get along if there's trouble over a, you know, a math problem and there's tears. And both of us need to be able to take that step back and calm ourselves and pray and come back into the situation and ask for forgiveness if we've been harsh, or just really prioritizing reconciliation and building character and building those relationships. That's something that I don't know if we would have as much intentionality and time to do if we were all going our separate ways during the day. And so that's one of the most challenging things for me, but I also think it's where we're seeing the most growth and the most encouraging changes in ourselves and in our kids. It's a very sanctifying process to be a parent at all, but also to have to be the teacher. And having those different roles of, well, how much do I push? How much am I the encourager? How much do I let them take a break? It's a constant quest for God's wisdom.
I can just imagine, you know, I mean, it's difficult enough, right, to parent, but then throwing in, you know, being sort of this a teacher figure, authority figure. You know, there are things that you have they have to learn, right, as a result. And so, do you ever worry? And I'm sure perhaps some parents who may be considering, you know, homeschooling, they're thinking, am I going to be able to teach my kids at an appropriate level, you know?
Right. That's a good question, too. I do check that sometimes. I'll go on Massachusetts state standards for what the public school students are learning for their age level and see if I think my kids can do that. There's a constant process of assessing and adjusting what the curriculum is teaching, how well they're responding to it. And honestly, for each of my kids, it's been a little bit different. But there are skills, what's beautiful about those state standards, there are skills that come back every year. And so we can have read aloud on the couch with all of us, and my 5-year-old is asking lots of questions, and the bigger kids are sometimes answering those questions for her. But all of them are talking and having that conversation. And it's, it's just a continuous reassessing, just like a teacher would do in a classroom. But it's much more of a one-room schoolhouse feel because I've got, you know, 5th grade, 3rd grade kindergarten, or 7th grade kindergarten.
So tell me a little bit, because, you know, one of the other things that I would imagine someone who's considering homeschooling, they may be thinking about if they are going to essentially, because, you know, one of the things that positive aspects of public schools or any independent school or charter school, right, is that the child is surrounded by other kids and by peers, et cetera. And there may be a fear, hesitation that you're sort of going at this solo. But from what you've told me and what I've read, right, since COVID, right, homeschooling has exploded. And there are also these sort of co-ops. Tell us a little bit about that, and because I'm sure people would be interested to learn that if they were to do this, you know, there is a community.
Yeah, there's a few different ways that you can get connected with a community. So we're part of a Classical Conversations group, and that meets in Watertown, but they have chapters around the city, around Massachusetts. I think there are some further out as well. And in each of those, it's a once-a-week meeting. It's 24 weeks out of the school year, and parents bring their children in, and the parents are the ones that are meant to be learning that day, learning ideas and tips for reviewing at home then that next week. But the kids also have a great time. It's introducing new concepts, so memory work, It's science experiments or fine art projects, and the kids give presentations to each other and give feedback to each other. So that's a really good way for them to grow in those social skills too. And we found a lot of really great community through that, just having other parents who are doing similar things. We all use different curricula at home, apart from that memory work core. So we don't always have someone that's doing the exact same English or math that we're doing. But just knowing that there's other parents that we know that are homeschooling on a Thursday can be really encouraging. And then I've also found other homeschoolers in our area that aren't necessarily part of our CC group, but I found a Facebook group when we moved to Malden recently, and they had a soccer team this summer that met with all different ages and all different skill levels and interest levels. And that was such a joy. Our kids loved it. And so we've gotten connected with some homeschooling families through that. And you'd be surprised. We met another homeschooling family during swimming lessons this summer too, just like someone who also homeschools and isn't part of any of the same groups otherwise, but they are out there. There are other families.
And it seems as though particularly Christian families have really taken to homeschooling. Do you have any kind of thoughts around that? And I don't know if that was part of the of your decision-making process. I know it's in your background and you've been homeschooled, and as has your husband, but I wonder if some of the other issues, related to public schools, gender identity, all of these things, what they're being taught, in the public schools, if that was a big concern for you and your husband as you were making the decision.
Yeah, that was definitely a factor. One of the things early on, I was having trouble deciding what we would want to do having our own kids, because I felt called to be able to serve in the classroom, and I thought, if all of the Christians leave the public schools, what will that do? And I still don't know the answer to that question, but as we talked about it more, the Lord just gave me a peace that if He gives us children, He's called me to steward them and to have that really strong influence of discipleship during the time that they're at home. And those years go by so fast. And so I'm thankful that we have the opportunity to homeschool, that it's possible for us, and that our kids are enjoying it. And I think there is definitely a factor for a lot of families, believers who are concerned about what's going on in public schools, or even just unsure of having other people take charge of education. Whereas if it's at home, you know what your kids are learning, and you can build on prior knowledge, and you can wait to introduce topics if that's best for your family. So that's been a blessing for us.
I wanted to follow up that question with another question regarding sort of the spiritual component, how you're able to bring that into the classroom, because that's another, I'm so glad that you mentioned sort of their discipling, because it's one of the things that we have talked a lot about, both in the parenting series and now in the education series, this idea, right, in Proverbs 22:6, and I keep mentioning it and harping on it, train up a child in the way he should go, and even when he's old, he will not depart from it. And so, that parents have a responsibility, right, to steward, right, their children well. And so how do you bring that into the classroom as well for your, is it 4 kids that you're homeschooling? And the little one, too, is maybe
the
there.
The oldest 3 are the ones that do the most. My 3-year-old wants to do school like everybody else, and so she's like, I do math, and she does her counting. But as far as the ones that are at the table for school, it's the 3 olders. But all of us do family devotions in the evenings, and so we're able to talk about what we've been reading in the Bible. We start our day of homeschool with some Bible copy work. So we began with a verse in Deuteronomy, and I'm going to forget where it comes from, but it says that the king was expected to copy the law, create his own copy of the law and have it, in order to not become too proud himself, and also to know God's ways and to be able to lead the people. And so we started with that this year in September, and I just said, this is something that the kings had to do. Why do you think it was important? And the kids not only have been then in Deuteronomy, they're just copying in from their Bibles. So they're in the Word. My littlest doesn't know how to read quite well yet, but she loves to write letters, and she's getting better. And so as she's learning to read, that's one of the first things she's learning to read, which is really exciting. But that's also an added bonus that they're improving their handwriting as well. So it's a great way to do copy work with something really valuable. My 10-year-old is, or almost 10, she's learning what the correct text looks like, as well as she's thinking about what she's reading. So sometimes she'll, later on during devotion, she'll say, oh, I just wrote about that in my copy work this morning. So it definitely gives us a great way to start the day in talking about what the law is and what God's will is. And then it just comes up in conversation. So talking about history or talking through the books that we're reading, looking at what the worldview is and comparing it to what the Bible tells us, because not everything that we get from the library shares our worldview or shows the same perspective. And so that gives great opportunities to teach them critical thinking, to model that, and to be asking good questions and be curious learners.
Yeah. So you mentioned the library. Now, is there, you get to choose your kids' books, right? It's not the state or, the district saying, okay, these are the books that we need for your kids to read through, et cetera, et cetera. Now, my follow-up question to you, when you were starting, this homeschooling journey, were there conferences or things? How would somebody, and I know you mentioned HSLDA. Are there other steps that a beginner, who's new to homeschooling or exploring homeschooling, are there other places that they can go?
There are many methods of homeschooling. It isn't just a one-size-fits-all, which is beautiful, but also it can be very overwhelming. I remember reading through all the philosophies and trying to figure out what am I going to do when my kids get big enough. We landed on classical, and it seems to me to fit very well how kids naturally learn. And so I've been blown away by how well it's working. But I know friends who do everything from like a very outdoors Charlotte Mason kind of approach to feeling like a classroom but just brought home, where you go through the subjects each day and you have all of your different textbooks and you're able to incorporate everything just like in a school classroom. So there's a wide spectrum. A convention should give you a good exposure to all of those, so you can kind of get a taste, and then also find out what resources are available in the area.
Now, so how many, not that I think you know all of them, but how many curriculums are there? And I know then for middle school or elementary school, or are there curriculums that take the kids all the way through? So I think you mentioned that classical conversations is an elementary middle school curriculum.
Our community goes up through 6th grade. There are programs. It actually started as a high school program, and then they created this foundations program to lay a foundation of memory work for that more rigorous high school program. But our Watertown community doesn't have one yet. There are some nearby. There's one in Burlington. I think there's one in Reading, maybe. But that would be a program that you could follow all the way through. That's our plan now, Lord willing, is to keep with that.
With classical conversations?
I think so, I'm excited for what the challenge program, that's what they call their high school, would be. It's it's very literature heavy, it's very logic and rhetoric heavy, which I think will be a great challenge for me and for the kids. But there are a lot of other programs. So some of the bigger publishers that you often hear about are Sunlight and Abeka, and for math, there's a lot of Saxon Math or Matthew C. Those are just some of the big ones that I hear a lot. It depends on the individual family. And something that I would say is if you start homeschooling, you don't have to stay with the curriculum you start with. So that's something that can be kind of nerve-wracking. Like, oh no, if I invest in this program, I really have to see it through to the end. But if it's not working for your kid or for you, there's other things out there that you can try. And sometimes you can hit on something great the first time, and that's wonderful. But there's always going to be adjustments, no matter what the program is.
One thing that I was interested in, because as I'm thinking, and hopefully as people are watching and are interested in this conversation, how it plays out sort of on a day-to-day basis with your kids. So, and now keeping in mind that she's Merissa and her children are going through the classical conversations model. And so tell us what a typical week, if there is a typical week, what that might look like.
Sure. So for us, Tuesday is the day that we meet with our community. So Tuesday is the big community day. We start in the morning with memory work and presentations, science, art, and then review time. Each of those is just half an hour, so it goes very fast. In the afternoon, my oldest does a writing and math program. So she works with other like 4th, 5th, 6th graders on that, and I get to tutor those, which is a joy. I get a little bit of that middle school taste. And then for the rest of the week, we're at home. So Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, we're reviewing what we got introduced to on Tuesday. For us, that looks like we start with our copy work in the morning, and then
what is copy work?
That's where we're looking in the Bible, and so they open up Deuteronomy and they're writing the verses.
So just copying it.
Yes, just copying. And I set, I usually find like a 4 or 5 minute classical piece, and we just listen to some music, and when the piece is over, then they're done copying for the day. So however much they get in those 4 minutes. Because some of them write a lot slower than the others. Then this is something brand new that I actually heard about at a homeschool conference I went to last month or 2 months ago. A family with many kids had said it works well if you have your older children have assigned times to play with the younger kids. And then you can focus on the ones that are still at the table for school, and they have that sibling connection time, and the little ones aren't at your feet. And that's been so nice. It's been a great addition to our day. So right now our schedule is I start with just the oldest at the table, and all the 4 youngers are kind of getting their things and playing. And then we switch, and so my 5-year-old plays with a 3 and 1-year-old while my older 2 get started, usually on math right away. But not always. They can change up the order. Then they trade, and the 7-year-old boy takes the 2 littles, and my 5-year-old comes for her phonics time. And by that time, my 10-year-old is usually doing her own work. She's got quite a few things she can do independently, so that's helpful. And then somewhere in there we have snack, and at snack time I try to read. We have these timeline cards that talk through one of the history events that we memorized that week. And it's pretty small. It's like 3 paragraphs, but I'll read that while they're having their snack. Some of it goes way over our heads, but we catch on to some, and that's good, I think. What's nice is the timeline we do every year. So we'll come back to it again next year, and we have a chance to read the same cards again. At lunchtime, we do our review, and so sometimes that means listening to the songs that were introduced, or watching a little YouTube movie that some other family put together with like funny puppets or something to remember the science sentence. So they do that during lunch, and then after lunch there's usually still some school to finish up. So the little 2, one is going down for a nap, and one just kind of wants to color or do her math where she's counting. But then the older ones are finishing up whatever schoolwork they still have. So at home we always do English and math, where they're doing their phonics program, or they're writing and practicing those skills. And then they all have a math program that they're working through. And then in the afternoon, we do a family read aloud time. And so that's where I try to get books that are related to our history for the week. This year's all about American history, so there's a lot of really great books that we can read together and talk about. And sometimes that relates to science too, and sometimes it's just beautiful picture books. And kind of training that curious reading habit. They all love to read on their own. So sometimes after that they'll read on their own, or want to go do an art project or something, and then they have time to play. We actually are incredibly blessed. We have a family of friends that live downstairs, and they are also homeschoolers. And so all the kids are done by about 2 o'clock, and they can all play together and be in the backyard if it's nice out. And so that gives them some really good social time. And helps me to be able to clean up after the day and reset for dinner. So that's kind of a typical day. That's like what Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Monday look like for us.
But those first 2 days, Monday and Tuesday, I think you said you come together in community, and I think you're meeting at a church right now, correct? And so the kids get placed in with their peers and whatever level they're in, and the lesson is done by a different parent.
Right. So I'm tutoring the class that has mostly 8 and 9-year-olds. And then there's a group that's like 9, 10, and 11s, and then there's the little ones, 4 and 5s, and then the 6 and 7s. So we have 4 tutors. Each of us are parents of one of the kids or more in the group. And so we're the ones that lead the lesson that day, and the parents who aren't tutoring are in with their kids, learning alongside and helping everybody stay organized and on topic as much as as possible. So that's our big community day once a week.
Okay, that's really. It sounds really wonderful, and it sounds like you have found a program that works for you.
Yeah.
Now let me ask, just as a last, thoughts. Anything that you can think of, any advice that you would have for a parent who's listening and considering doing homeschooling?
Yeah. One thing that I heard recently from Sarah McKenzie, who does a Read Aloud Revival podcast. So she has great tips for anybody, not just homeschoolers. But something she said is that homeschooling is measured in years, not in days or months. And that was incredibly encouraging for me, because sometimes you look at just the day-to-day grind,
right?
And it's like, are we making any progress? Like, will we ever learn to read? Or, whatever the thing is that you're currently working on. But thinking about it as being measured in years, it's partially a little bit nerve-wracking because there's not that many years then. You don't have that many. But thinking about it more in the long term is a good way to remember that it's not about making a success each day. It's not even about seeing the small bits of progress, but looking back over long periods of time and seeing the growth in ourselves and in our kids, I think is a beautiful way to give testimony to how God is working. So that's an encouraging piece. I also think a lot of parents think they can't homeschool, maybe because you won't know enough to teach the older ages, or you don't feel like you're equipped to be that teacher. There are so many curricula options that offer all the scripting you would need. If you feel like you need someone to tell you what to say, there are options that are there. And the other thing is, you know your child best. And so in many ways, you're already cut out to be their best teacher. You don't have to have a training in education. You don't have to have a flawless education yourself. I think one of the benefits of being a homeschool teacher is that I get to keep learning, and I love it. And that's been a huge joy for our families to all learn together. So I hope that's encouraging.
Now, are you planning to homeschool your kids through 12th grade?
That's the plan, as long as it's working well for everybody. I have seen homeschooling isn't always for everyone, and so if one of our kids has special learning needs, or maybe there'll be a program that they want to enter early and do some sort of tech training, like beyond what we can do at home. Who knows what there may be. But right now our plan is, we'll keep going.
Well, thank you, Merissa, so much. I really appreciate this conversation. And I hope that if you are considering homeschooling, that you've learned. But there are a lot of things to keep in mind. It's both challenging, but it's a joy. And, we want to be able to steward our kids. And if you are able to, and we do understand that not every parent is able to homeschool. And so, but that doesn't mean that you can't, if your child is in public school or in independent school, wherever he is, that you can still teach them. And you are still, tasked with stewarding them well. But thank you so much for joining us. I hope to see you next time as we continue the conversation on education. God bless you. We'll see you.